Chapter 2 of Baiting the Bears by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2. Phil enters the employ of Lawrance Lockwood, banker and broker. "You're home early today, Phil," remarked his mother, a gentle-looking little woman of perhaps 38 who had been a widow for 3 years. "Yes, mother," answered the stalwart young son, as he kissed her according to his usual custom. "The fact is, Mr. Rowland discharged me this afternoon." "Discharged you?" exclaimed Mrs. Thorne blankly. "Yes, mother. Now, don't you get worried. I expect to get a better position tomorrow." "I hope you will, my son. You know I depend almost wholly on your wages for our support." "Why did Mr. Rowland discharge you?" He told his mother the presumed reason, as he got it from his friend Dick Ovens. "It ought to be a lesson to you, Phil, to be more careful in the future how you express your opinions." "I suppose I was careless, mother, but I couldn't help it. Rowland lost a clear $60,000 by buying a stock which any man on the street who has followed the market carefully could have told him was on the verge of a collapse. Well, it did tumble, and he got it in the neck. I'm not a bit sorry for him now. He treated me quite shabbily. You can sit up to the table now. Supper is ready." The Thornes lived in a small 5-room flat on East 116th Street, Harlem. A brother of Mrs. Thorne, who was a printer not always employed, lived with them. About 7 o'clock, Phil put on his hat and went around to call on his friend Dick Ovens, who lived with his parents in the next street. Dick's great fad was dogs. He always had 1 or 2 in evidence in the flat, but he never kept the same dog long. He'd either sell it or swap it off for a new dog. This evening Phil found him playing with a new animal he had just brought home. "Where'd you get that yeller pup?" asked Phil with a grin. "Don't say a word," replied Dick solemnly. "This dog is a wonder." "Is he? In what way?" "His intelligence is something extraordinary." "Is that so? Well, let's see what he can do." "He can't do anything just now. It isn't time." "How's that?" "He was taught to say his prayers, and the fellow who sold him to me says he wags his tail whenever he sees a minister anywhere near him." "Is that a fact?" laughed Phil. "That isn't half as wonderful as the dog I read about in the paper the other day." "Tell me about him," said Dick, looking up in an interested manner. "This was a house dog. One day when he got out on the street, some boys tied a tin can to his tail. Now what do you suppose that dog did? Give it up. He just headed for the nearest milkman's and backed up against the counter." "Oh, come off it, Phil Thorne. It's just as probable as that yarn about this pup. All right, let it go at that. Did you catch on to Lockwood's?" "I'll know tomorrow morning. Mr. Lockwood told me to call him at 10 o'clock, and he'd let me know." And then Phil told Dick of his adventure on the street with the banker. "That settles it, Phil," cried Dick. "That job is yours." "I hope so, but I never hello until I'm out of the wood. Let me give you a tip on one thing. If you go to work there, steer clear of the messenger. His name is Enoch Reese. He's a big, overgrown kid and a nephew of the head bookkeeper. What's the matter with him? He's stuck on himself, as sassy as if he were the junior member of the firm. I know you won't stand for much guff, and he's a chap that'll lay it on thick. I thought I'd warn you, because if you should happen to have a run-in with him, it might get you into trouble, as his uncle will probably stand up for him." "Thanks, Dick. Scrapping doesn't pay, but I won't put up with an insult." "I don't blame you. However, you won't be the only new one in Lockwood's." "What do you mean?" "The stenographer is new. She went to work Monday. The other left to get married. I heard that Weaver, the cashier, was sweet on her, but it didn't do him any good. I guess he'll be making up to the new one now." Phil didn't wait to see the yellow dog say his prayers, but went home early. Next morning, promptly at 10, he entered the reception room at Lockwood's. A broad-shouldered, awkward-looking boy came up to him. Phil didn't require an introduction to identify this youth as Enoch Reese. "What do you want?" he asked Thorne rather rudely. "I wish to see Mr. Lockwood." "What's your business?" "I have an engagement with Mr. Lockwood at 10 o'clock. Enoch Reese looked at him with an ill-disguised contempt. "Well, what's your name, then?" "Phil Thorne." "Worked at Rowland's across the street, didn't you?" with a sneer. "Yes." "And got fired yesterday?" with an ugly grin. Phil's eyes flashed, but he bit his lips and made no reply. "Well, it isn't any use for you looking for a position here, 'cause the place is spoken for, see?" Those words were like a dash of ice water on Phil's bright anticipations. But he wasn't going to let Enoch Reese have the satisfaction of knowing that the intelligence hurt him. He merely said quietly, I wish you'd take my name into Mr. Lockwood." Enoch wheeled about and entered the private office. In a moment he returned, and, jerking his thumb toward the inner sanctum, said, "You can go in." Phil immediately walked in. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," said the banker pleasantly. "Sit down." "Good morning, sir," answered Phil politely. "Since I saw you yesterday," began Mr. Lawrance, "my head bookkeeper, Mr. Reese, spoke to me about a friend of his whom he wished me to employ. I saw the young man, who submitted excellent references, and I told him I would give him an answer this morning." "Then I presume I haven't any chance," said Phil, drawing a long breath, while his bright face reflected the disappointment he felt. "On the contrary, I have already decided to employ you," replied the banker with a friendly smile. Phil could hardly believe his ears. His sensations were almost like those of a man under sentence of death who has unexpectedly been reprieved. "But you said the other applicant was recommended by your bookkeeper, Mr. Reese." "True, but I have reasons for not caring to take that young man into my office. Are you ready to begin your duties, Thorne?" "Yes, sir." "Very well, then. Come with me." Mr. Lockwood took Phil into his counting room and introduced him first to Mr. Reese as the successor of his deceased employee, and then to Mr. Weaver, the cashier. He pointed out the desk Phil was to have, and explained the general character of his present duties. "Mr. Reese will give you any information you may require," said the banker finally, and then left Phil to get broken in. The fact that Phil Thorne had gotten a position was evidently an unpleasant shock to Reese. He glared sourly at the boy while Mr. Lockwood was talking to him, and as soon as the banker returned to his private office, he went over to the cashier and had a short talk with him on the subject. Weaver was evidently hand in glove with Reese, for he agreed to everything the head bookkeeper said, and several times favored the new clerk with a supercilious stare, far from friendly. Enoch Reese also came into the counting room, stuck his head in at the cashier's window, and had something to say, too. Inside of an hour there wasn't a clerk in the place but understood that the newcomer wasn't looked on with favor by the head bookkeeper and the cashier. Phil, busy with his new duties, was quite unconscious of the situation. Before the day was over, he made the acquaintance of the rest of the employees, including Marie Minturn, the pretty little stenographer. Outside of Reese and Weaver, the rest of the force seemed to be favorably impressed with the new clerk, and their manner toward him showed it. Once during the afternoon, Phil got the chance to examine the tape at the indicator. It happened he was interested in P&Q stock, as he had bought 10 shares of it 3 days before at 40 on the 10% margin. The price had gone up several points since then, and it made him feel good. It was the third small deal he had made within the month. He had realized about $50 on the other two, and most of that little fund he had put up on margin to carry the present speculation. On the success of this venture largely depended any future plunges on the market. End of chapter 2.